So, last year I said that the iPad Air 3 was one of the worst value iPads on the market, but now that the price has finally dropped as of 2023, its value is actually one of the best, being around $230 USD for a still very solid and robust tablet. And so, after using it myself for the past 3 years, I'm going to be telling you whether this is the perfect value budget iPad you've been searching for. So first up, the design. One thing you'll notice straight away is that it is unbelievably thin and light. It's only 6.1mm thick, literally thinner than a pencil. It's super comfy to grip even with a case on, and carrying it around in a backpack is no strain. And somehow, the build quality doesn't actually feel compromised because of this, it still feels really premium and solid. Now, the Air 3 does carry that older design with the home button and bezels, but the bezels are actually quite small on here, a lot less prominent when viewing content than you'd think. It's like the perfect combination of having the home button while retaining as much display area as possible. Plus, that home button also packs in Touch ID, which still works really fast. You only have to brush past it very lightly for your finger to be recognized. Super quick and responsive. I'm also gonna add that if you don't like using the home button, you can also just swipe up from the bottom to go home like you would on any home buttonless iPad. Now on the bottom we have our speakers and lightning port. Yes, unfortunately no USB-C on here. This was 2019 and the speakers are okay, nothing special, especially because it's not a quad speaker setup like on a lot of newer iPads. You don't get the two additional ones at the top, which is definitely not as immersive, but these ones still do the job. Although we do get a headphone jack at the top, which I know a lot of people will be happy with considering that it's been killed off on pretty much everything in recent years. And on the side there's the smart connector for attaching keyboards, which is great if you're typing up a lot of documents. Also, the sides are rounded, not square like pretty much every new iPad nowadays, which is something that a lot of people will appreciate. Now one other cool thing worth noting is that this iPad design is actually identical to the 2017 10.5-inch iPad Pro. They pretty much just took away the top speakers on the Air 3 and made the space grey a lot darker, so it can be quite confusing to differentiate the two. But all in all, I really like this design. It's incredibly thin and light, its looks are nothing special, but it's sleek enough, and it's a good combination of the home button and the all-screen setup. Now in terms of the display on the iPad Air 3, it's not the absolute best anymore, but it does really well for most people. It's a 10.5-inch 60Hz LCD Retina panel with a resolution of 2224 by 1668, along with a pixel density of 264 pixels per inch. So it's got quite a bit going for it. It's a really decent size, especially because of those small bezels, and it's more than sharp enough so that you can't see any individual pixels. So for most people, it's gonna do the job really well. The only things it's missing that I wouldn't mind having are a high refresh rate and mini LED. Although again, this was 2019, these kind of things weren't too widespread in mobile technology just yet. But the refresh rate on here is only 60Hz, so swiping around and scrolling is not going to be as buttery as on the iPad Pros with 120Hz. But if you're not used to 120Hz in the first place, then it shouldn't be an issue. Also, with the LCD display, you're not getting those deep true blacks like on mini LED or OLED panels. Instead, the black is going to be emulated with a dark purpley shade. Although at this point, mini LED is only available on the 12.9-inch iPad Pros past 2021, so 99% of other iPads are in the same boat. Also, this is a laminated display, so it feels like you're touching the actual screen, not just above it. The 9th generation budget iPad, which Apple is still selling, does not have a laminated screen, and it's definitely quite a noticeable difference, yet the cheaper iPad Air 3 does have it. Oh, and we also have first generation Apple Pencil compatibility here, really useful for digital artists or students who like to handwrite notes. It is $100 from Apple, but honestly, it opens up a whole world of functionality to the iPad, so it's more than worth it. Unfortunately, you do have to charge it through the Lightning port, which is probably the most Apple thing I've ever seen, but yeah, that's what you sign up for. But all things considered, this is a pretty hard display to complain about. Again, the main drawbacks are the lack of 120Hz and mini LED technology, but it's still extremely sharp, small bezels, and in general, just a good display that does the job well. But now, let's move on to the inside of the iPad Air 3 and take a look at the performance, which is definitely still there. On here, we get the Apple A12 chipset and 3GB of RAM. The A12 is still very substantial. The Air 3 still feels really responsive, really snappy, and there's no lag or delays when opening apps or doing intensive activity. This chipset has just been really well optimized over the years with each update, so it should continue to stay fluid for quite a few years more. Now yes, if you compare it side by side to newer iPads, there will be a noticeable difference in terms of how fast apps open or how long it takes to export large files, but it's not a super drastic difference. To the average consumer, it's going to feel just about the same. So power user or not, the iPad Air 3's performance is more than enough, and it will be for years to come, even on its final software version, which shouldn't be for quite a while. With the Apple A12 chipset coming out in 2018, and iPads usually getting around 7 to 8 years of updates nowadays, it's probably safe to say that it'll get updates until around 2026, maybe 2027 2027, and then app compatibility should continue for 1 or 2 years after that. Either way though, it's not the absolute best long-term solution, but it's still got a decent chunk of life left in it. If you're someone who likes to keep devices for years and years and run them into the ground, there are better long-term solutions out there, but the Air 3 is still quite a decent bit away from obsolescence. Now touching on the battery life, it's actually surprisingly still really good, even after I've used it since mid-2020. It's got an 8134 mAh cell, which is a very decent size for how thin the chassis is, and assuming it hasn't degraded too much over the years, it'll easily last a full day and more with normal use, and even with heavy use, it usually still pulls through. I mean, like all aspects, battery on here is going to be better on newer iPads, especially because their batteries haven't had time to degrade over the years, but for the vast majority of people, battery life on here is honestly fine. Although of course, when buying used, you're going to want to make sure that you're getting a device with good battery health, because some of these are going to have pretty short batteries inside. And finally, I've left the cameras till last because they're not really that important on tablets, but the ones on here still do the job just fine for FaceTime calls or scanning documents. On the rear, there's a single 7-megapixel lens and a 5-megapixel selfie camera on the front. Like every iPad except for like the newest iPads, the cameras are really nothing special. The rear one is about the same quality as the iPhone 6 to give you some perspective, so it's really not great. It's grainy, there's no stabilization, so not really ideal for the iPad photographer, which I know definitely exist out there, but for iPad-y activities and not actual photography, it does just fine. Same thing with the selfie camera, it's just really grainy and generally not a great image, but again, for video calling, it does the job just fine. You can still tell what's going on in the image. It's not a phone selfie camera, so I'm not going to knock it too hard, but I will admit the center stage feature on the newest iPads is quite useful, so it is lacking in terms of that. And so with everything about the iPad Air 3 considered, should you pick one up on the used market if you're after a more than decent tablet in the $200 to $300 range? Well, considering that it still provides a smooth and pleasant user experience, yes, absolutely. Now that the price has dropped in the last year, it's no longer the terrible value it once was. Nowadays, it's actually one of the best iPads in this segment, but I am also going to mention that the 10.5-inch iPad Pro from 2017 is pretty much the same price and same design, but it adds better cameras, 120Hz display, and dual speakers, although it's got an older chipset and worse battery life. So if you care more about high-end features than a little bit more longevity, performance, and better battery, that could be a decent option if those things are important to you. Otherwise, the Air 3 is a better bet if you care more about long-term stability, performance, and battery life. It's also worth noting that if you want extras like the Apple Pencil or keyboard, you'll have to pay quite a bit extra, probably upwards of $200, but it should be discounted to some extent if you can find a second-hand listing that includes both of those things. You would have to pay that anyway no matter what iPad you buy, especially if it's a new one, so it's more of a hidden cost than a drawback, but they're definitely things worth investing in, as they just bring in so much more functionality to the iPad, although they're not absolutely essential, especially if you're not into drawing or typing documents. But all in all, the iPad Air 3 is still just a really pleasant experience, and it should stay that way for a few years to come. I've been using it now for about 3 years, since mid-2020, and it was great for typing up documents on the go and handwriting notes in high school last year. If you're on a tight budget and you need a super reliable and pleasant tablet experience, the iPad Air 3 performs more than well for its price. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, please make sure you drop me a like and subscribe to TechSpree for more reviews, insights, and the occasional unboxing. Also, if you'd like to have a stalk, my Instagram is at tech_spree and my Twitter is at techspree1. Thank you so much for watching. This is Tom with TechSpree, and I'll see you as always next time.